Hey guys, today I'm talking about this piece I made where I layered the same drawing on itself, slightly changed with tracing paper to kind of see what kind of effects I could achieve with tracing paper and just experimenting. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I experimented with how they would show up on the paper. I was really impressed at how well it appeared and held up. I thought the paper would kind of disintegrate or like get very wrinkly like it does when you get it wet, but I think since the Posca paint pens are they're very not watered down acrylic paint, there must be some kind of property there that keeps them from doing that. I would like to experiment with other mediums to kind of see what other effects it would have on the tracing paper and see what else it could hold up against, because I think that could be really interesting. I'm using 9x12 Studio 71 tracing paper and Posca paint pens. I don't know if I recommend this paper because it got really wrinkly, but that may just be because I left it alone or got it wet or something, so just put an asterisk beside that. It could be a totally fine piece of paper and I just got it wrinkly, but I was just trying to experiment and see what I could make, so I decided not to worry about it too much. After I experimented with the paper, I sketched out the drawing, and this is actually one of the favorite drawings for this piece that I did. I think it kind of captured the feeling that I wanted, and then when I was inking and tracing it, it kind of was not going quite how I wanted, but that's okay. Just kind of happens that way sometimes. At first, I wanted to back it with one white piece of paper, so I'm using Canson 120-pound watercolor paper, but I end up changing my mind later, as you will see, and I redo this one drawing on tracing paper. I do still kind of like how this one turned out. I'm using the Huion lightpad to trace the tracing paper over the top of it because the watercolor paper is so thick. I wanted to make sure I could see the light pencil marks through. I'm using washi tape here to hold down the paper and hold it together since the paper is so thin. I wanted a very lightweight tape so I could be sure it wouldn't tear. I thought about like clipping it together, but since I was offsetting it, it would have been kind of difficult to do it that way. So I mostly chose a red-blue palette. I thought about also incorporating purple and maybe a little white for highlights, but I decided to kind of not do that and keep it simple. The reason I kind of went with these colors is that kind of is what is used to create kind of a 3D effect, and while I knew the piece wasn't really gonna look 3D in that way, I kind of wanted to evoke that feeling of the person in the piece kind of moving towards you, or they're being forced forward in space or something like that. So that was kind of my thought process there. I do really kind of like these colors together. I mean, it's pretty basic, just bright red and bright blue. But I think that the Posca pens, they just have such a nice vibrancy to them that it really just makes those colors look super good together and just so nice and clean. So this piece was inspired by a song by The National called You Had Your Soul With You off the album I Am Easy to Find. I've had this idea for this piece ever since I heard the song when the album first came out, which was in 2019. So I've been thinking about this one for a while, but I finally sat down and I did it. So I was pretty happy about kind of getting that idea out of my head. I wish I could just play the song with this video, but I cannot because of copyrights and whatnot. So I will just encourage you to go listen to it because I think it's a pretty good song. I really like that album. I always really love drawing pieces based off of songs. I had a project when I was in school where I would just take little like postcard size piece of watercolor paper, and I would take a song that I really liked and I would try and illustrate them. And that was when I was in a real creative slump, so none of the pieces really turned out how I liked, but it kind of got me making stuff. And that's one of the things about music, is it always kind of makes me want to make stuff. If you have like certain songs that like really inspire you, I'd love to hear about them, or whatever else you kind of use that gets your creative juices flowing. This is where I start to redraw it on the black tracing paper, which I think kind of creates a better effect overall. Even though it's still kind of a little creepy looking at the end, you'll kind of see when like the light is shining through it. I was not super happy with how this turned out in the end. The drawings were not quite what I envisioned. Like, I messed up when I inked some of the face details, so they're kind of off and uncanny, but it was still a lot of fun to do. I'd like to try this technique again, maybe with a different illustration or the same one, to see if I could achieve it a little better or on better paper. After I did the initial inking, I did all the pieces, I decided I wanted like a little bit more shading, I guess, in them and kind of fill in the spaces. So I came back and did a second pass where I just kind of added more to mostly the hair and like under the chin and stuff like that. I still kept it pretty minimal, but I wanted to add a little bit more solid areas just for a little bit more like dimension and pop. So I make a critical mistake here, and you will be able to see what it is in just a few seconds. So let's listen into my live reaction. No. Yeah, don't do that. Be more careful than I am. This is, I think, one of my greatest weaknesses as an artist, is I'm just not very careful a lot of the times. Like, I just get too absorbed in what I'm doing, or I like set myself up for like, sometimes I am like doing something when I'm drawing and I know it, I'm gonna regret it later, but I still do it, and I just don't know why that is. So that's something I really want to work on, is just being more careful. In this case, I decided to just kind of ignore it and press on. So I just was experimenting, so I wasn't too pressed about it. So then at the end, I glued it all together with an Uhu paper glue stick, which is really good for mixed media stuff, but it did warp the tracing paper even a little bit more. I wonder if something like rubber cement would be better, but the paper's so thin, it might just always warp if you add something kind of water-based like that, except if you tape it together, which I didn't really want to do. Overall, even though the piece didn't turn out exactly how I wanted, I'm still happy I did it. It was a fun experiment, and I got to communicate at least partly the feeling of the song. I'd love to revisit this technique in another piece. But let me know your thoughts. If you've ever tried working on tracing paper, if you know how to get better results than me. I'd also be curious to try other mediums on tracing paper and see how those work. So let me know if you've tried those too. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.